Welcome to the church split. That was an accident. So I forgot to exit the thing, so it's fine. But we're gonna get started right here, right now. What's up, heretics? My name is Will, and I'm joined by the heretic or the Orthodox. The real question is going to be here: who's the heretic, me or Amber? Just kidding. So Amber is a good friend of mine and the channel, and we've had coffee together. We've had lots of conversations together. I've been on her channel, and I have woefully not had her on my channel, and I have never heard the end of it. So here we are paying my dues. But anyway, Amber is she's one of the rare people in this space where there's a woman who loves to do theology and stuff. So it's been a lot of fun. And I know that comes with its own set of challenges for her sometimes, but we do love Amber around here, including all the times she makes fun of me and tells me I am wrong, because it sounds like I'm wrong about 9 times out of 10, I believe is what she said is the ratio. So that's fine. But we're here for it. So anyway, guys, welcome Amber, also known as When Deep Calls Deep. Her information is in the description below. If you have not subscribed to her channel, you should. She's an actual Old Testament scholar and expert in these areas. That's what her studies are. And she's in the hardcore field of this thing. We love Amber for that, which is why she has far more qualifications when it comes to those things than myself, which is why, again, I'm wrong 9 times out of 10. So, all right, with all that said, Amber, welcome to the church split.
Okay, I want to clarify that. That was Warren who said that I was right 9 times out of 10. Not me. That was not that was, if you want, go blame Warren for that one, because
nope, I blame Warren.
So, we always like to blame Warren around here. That's a good place to go with that one.
It is good.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me on. It's been fun. I don't know what Jordan's going to do now that he's not speculating as to why you haven't had me on the church split.
You know, I love proving that man wrong. Nothing gives me more joy than proving Jordan wrong. For those who do not know, Jordan is a friend of mine. He's been on the channel. He's in our the Facebook group. He's the lead admin in my church split apologetics group. And he's been harassing me for a long time. He thinks that this is a great thing that'll never happen. It is me actually having Amber on. So anyway.
My name's Amber. I don't like the word scholar because it just makes me sound like I know more than I do. Because I'm still learning, and I don't think I will ever stop learning, and I don't think I will ever feel like I have mastered or am an expert in anything except not knowing much at all. So I really still cringe when people call me that, because it's just kind of uncomfortable for me. But I am a super high level Bible nerd, and I absolutely love getting into the depths of theology. And, it's really been fun, because Will and I, especially off screen, have had some really good back and forth and some really good positive discussions. So we don't hate each other as much as it sounds like. We really don't. I only get snarky with him most of the time in his live stream chats, just because it's fun and I enjoy giving him hard.
Oh, absolutely. Well, that's why my friends, if my friends don't roast me, they're not my friends. I instantly I'm like, are you not comfortable with me? If that makes me feel like they actually might hate me. Roddy says the humility is feigned, folks. She loves being called a scholar.
He is the person who knows that is exactly not true.
Exactly.
Roddy's another good friend. Anyway, so we're here to talk about, because this is actually something that started way back in May, when I was visiting and was talking to you about becoming a catechumen and my decision to fully go Orthodox. And as we were talking about that, I'm like, I don't know and we went back and forth a lot about, am I going to go public about this? Am I just going to stay quiet about this? Because I didn't want to do one of those oh, look, come watch my channel because now I'm Orthodox things, because that I'm not a fan of that either, kind of thing. So I wasn't going to go public. And then after at my baptism, cremation, chrismation, not cremation. I have had enough coffee yet today.
News today, Amber's dead. So
just about. It's the end of the semester, so I'm about dead. That's for sure.
I understand that.
But we had been talking about that, and Will and I had gone back and forth with several conversations about, like, do I go public? What are the ups and downs of going public? And had, several conversations about that. And Will's like, if you do go public, you need you need to come on Church Split and talk about it. And I was like, well, I okay. So I told Will I promised him, like, if I decide to go public, Church Split gets to be the first channel that I go talk about this on.
Which I'm so happy about. And the reason why, by the way, is one, I find it fascinating whenever anyone makes such a big shift. Because from Protestantism, you can go from like Baptist to any other Protestant group, and it's not that big of a deal. It's just maybe some things change. But we go from Protestant to something like Roman Catholic or Eastern Orthodox is a big deal. But also because everyone knows I love a lot of things about Orthodoxy, but I also have a video that I put out that said why I'm not Orthodox. And I want people to also hear somebody who did the opposite, because I really do want us all to, work out our salvation with fear and trembling. I want us to wrestle with things of God. I want us to do that and show the fact that you can do that amicably.
Right. And I think, sent you a few, not as many messages as I wanted to, about disagreeing with some of the things that you guys said in that video, because there were some things that, and because you did one with the guys with Trinity Radio as well. And both of those, both of those I had some issues with. So I sent you a few of those objections, and a few of them I just kept to myself because it wasn't going to be helpful.
And then we talked about it over coffee, and it was good.
Right. So. And I think that's one of the important pieces too, because you and I did get a chance to, because I got to come up and visit, and you and I got to had several times to sit down and have a coffee a few times, and we went out to dinner with everybody, and that was really fun. You and I and Pritchett and Braxton and Stephen from the Curious Kairos all got to go out to dinner, and we had a blast. And Braxton is still trying to make up for for that little faux pas during dinner, but that was a lot of fun. I still giving him a hard time about that, but so I told Will, if I decide to go public, that I'll come and we'll have that conversation first, because I've had a few people reach out and want me to come tell my story, and I'm like, well. So when I decided, there's one or two that I might do that for, but I have to get in touch with Will and let him know and cash in on that promise that I made first before I go do that. Because that's just kind of how I am. So
you mean you're just a very honest person. You take your word seriously. That's we could use more of that nowadays. So no one's gonna fault you for that.
So here I am, and here we are, and I don't know how interesting that conversation is, because I'm just not horribly interesting, but we'll see how the best we can do here.
Nonsense.
All right. When you're done looking at your phone, you had questions.
Yes. So I want you to, my wife did text me. That's really funny that you called me out on that. So anyway, but my wife can text me whenever she wants.
Yes.
But all right. So the real question is what, I guess, is your background, and why did you become Orthodox? Because I feel like that's not something that happens overnight. That's something where you have slight shifts, one little baby step at a time.
Right. So I grew up in something that is called the Restoration Movement, that was founded. The dates are contested exactly, somewhere between 1790 and 1820 by Barton Stone and father-son pair of Thomas and Alexander Campbell. And then there was a fourth guy, that is Walter Scott. So those four guys ended up getting together. Three of them, Stone and the Campbells, were all dissatisfied Presbyterian ministers that ended up leaving the Presbyterian Church. And then I think Walter Scott was the Baptist who couldn't get along with the rest of the Baptists. So the four of them got together. The four of them got together and decided they were going to come back and restore and rediscover the original church out of Acts 2. So this is a group that rejects any and all councils and creeds. They reject any kind
Oh,
of
good.
ecclesiastical structure. They reject. I did there's a video on my channel where I interviewed a guy who's from the other side. So this movement, right after the Civil War, during Reconstruction, it split and it went into the Church of Christ and the Disciples of Christ. So you guys might know those names. Those are Restoration Movement Campbellites.
Yep.
So, and that really, the dirty laundry that they don't like to talk about is that was basically over money, because the Southern churches trying to get back in Reconstruction and get established during the Civil War didn't have any money, and churches in the North did. And so the churches in the South asked the churches in the North for help, and they basically said, yeah, we helped end slavery, so that's good enough. You're on your own from here. And because largely because of a lack of funds and lack of communication or cooperation, the churches split. The Southern Church of Christ developed and became non-instrumental. The churches in the North didn't. And so then both sides had to invent theology to defend their positions of why they had instruments and why they didn't, which is really, really how it
Bizarre.
works a lot of the time. Yeah. And then back in 1960 or 61, the Disciples of Christ had a group split off from them that became the Independent Non-Denominational Christian Church, which is the group that I grew up in. So it was like splits of splits of splits. And so
funny how that works.
Yes. Yeah. And so this is another one of those groups that had their own version of the Christian Church, Church of Christ stuff. And they like to say things like Christians first, but not the only Christians. But they can't even decide amongst themselves and get along amongst themselves enough to cooperate, let alone, with the ecumenical movements and things like that. So it really is, it really was a group. It was an island unto themselves. And I don't know, one of the things that I saw a lot, because both my parents were in full-time ministry pretty much most of my whole life. And so I grew up as a double pastor's kid, because my dad did the senior pastor stuff and my mom was the music and the youth pastor. And so that was just kind of they did that for 50 years and then they finally retired and now they're part-time missionaries in Africa. But when you live in that world and you're a pastor's kid, everybody is in ministry. And, I went to undergrad Bible college and so most everybody I knew was in ministry. And I did that for a while. But I saw that way you see a lot of the ugly side of things, and you grew up on a lot of the ugly side of things, and watching how sometimes people's pain or, inability to, I don't know, deep transformation was doing things like splitting churches and destroying people's ministry and destroying people in those churches. And in those kinds of churches, there is nobody else outside the church that has the authority to come in and remove a pastor who is a problem or to deal with an elder who is a problem. So you're stuck. So if you've got a pastoral issue, you can't, even efforts if the congregation gets together and tries to vote him out, even that doesn't always work. So you have no accountability outside of what the pastor and the elders do. And a lot of those churches, the pastor is a voting elder. And so there's no balance of power there. And
right. So it ends up being completely, yeah,
which is really concerning when there's no oversight at all. And you don't have another level or another outside, group that can come in and kind of referee some of those things and remove people who are problems. And so, it was a very difficult world to grow up in. And I think for me, when I was a kid, I got really sick with autoimmune issues, and I still struggle with them now. And with stuff and things have gotten a little bit worse again, but it's been a lifelong thing. There was a whole lot of issues going on there, and when your own church tells you don't come back until whatever it is isn't a thing anymore, that hurts a lot, and the people, the one place you're supposed to be able to go and be loved and accepted. I remember there was this older grandmother age lady, and I was probably 14 at the time, came up to me and had been we just gotten back from another round of organ transplant workup stuff, which if you've never survived being evaluated for organ transplantation, that is nothing but physical torture. And
yeah, I bet.
So we had gotten back, and it had been 3 years of struggling with this, and it had been, it was really bad, and I was really struggling, suffering with a lot of depression, trying to deal with all of that kind of stuff, and feeling very alone and abandoned by God. And this elderly lady in our church, well-meaning, walked up to me and said, "Aren't you so grateful for the miracle of God? You're still alive." And I really wanted to spit in her face. I was so upset. Like, I get where you're trying to come from, but how about maybe asking how I'm doing first before you try to project your idea of how I should be feeling about something for me that is living hell before you start talking. And so there was a whole lot. There's a whole lot of that kind of stuff that was going on, and you're just watching that kind of thing over and over and over again. And so I ended up, by the time, after some really, really, really bad experiences in undergrad, because I went to 2 Restoration Movement schools to get my undergrad degree. And the first attempt was so bad, it ended up in a suicide attempt. And then the second time, I was so done with the nonsense that I actually just left the church for a while. Just like, I grabbed my degree, peace out, I'm gone. I'm not coming back to church. God exists, I'm pretty sure about that. And the Jesus thing, I'm okay with that. But I'm done with church. I'm just not going to do that anymore, ever again. And stayed out for about 7 years. And it was in the process of getting ready to adopt our daughter that it was just kind of like, well, it was a lot of fun when I was a kid, and I want to be able to take her to VBS and have her learn the good ethics that I learned growing up out of, coming out of church. And that was good. Then that was the thing that kind of started pulling me back in. But in that process of trying to figure out how to navigate all of the trauma, and as I started learning more and more, kind of like, well, this is, for some reason, I just don't fit. And people don't seem to be understanding the questions that I'm trying to ask. And I just trying to figure out why. And so 2019, I remember that was really vividly. I was talking to one of the new pastors at the church I was going to at the time, because I was at that church for about 9 years. And had made several attempts to be like, guys, I need help. I need guidance. I have a whole lot of questions. I really need to have some people sit down and discuss these things with me. And I don't feel like I fit. So I was talking to one of the new pastors who was brought on to do youth and family. And we were sitting there, and I was just like telling him the whole story. And I'm like, I just don't feel like I belong here. I can't feel like, I'm having trouble connecting. I just, I need some help. And he looked right at me, Will, and he said, well, we just finished reading this book as a staff that was talking about how churches can only meet the needs of 85% of the people that go to them. And I'm sorry, you're in the 15%. And I was
What? That was his response.
That was his response. And I was just crushed.
Oh.
And it just, I was like, and I had tried several times with, asking the pastors like theological questions, and they're like, okay, no, go ask your small group. And I would like, hey guys, is anybody like to talk about like theology and this kind of stuff? And people would be like, yeah, we do. We love to talk about that. I'm like, okay, great. Cause I have questions. And I would get 2 questions in and people would bail because they're like, those are too hard. We can't answer those questions. And like you're gonna destroy yourself and destroy your faith and destroy your love for God if you keep asking those kinds of questions. And it was just like, no, and so I started to be like, okay, so what is wrong with me? Like there has to be something wrong if I don't feel like I can fit in at church. Because these guys are trying. I mean, they do care, and they, but there's also trying to manage a church of 500. And it's very hard to get to know 500 people when you're the senior pastor. It's just physically impossible. And I was like, okay. And I started digging into, this is what the theology that I was handed. I need to do some spring cleaning on my theology, apparently, and I need to get things, straightened out. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to look all this stuff up and find where in the Bible does all this stuff. And I just couldn't find a lot of it. And so I started asking just more and more questions. I'm like, you know what? I really think that, there was a point where at this point our daughter was getting ready to graduate from high school. I'm like, I need something else to do with myself now. I've been a stay-at-home mom for a long time. I need something else to do with myself. So I'll go back to school. I'll go to seminary. I'll go I love the Old Testament. I'll go learn Hebrew, go learn and then figure out what I'm going to do with myself when I graduate. And then, not worry about answering all these questions and just go nerd out for a while with people who like to nerd out. So I'll just do that. And it was in that process. I remember I sat there that first semester and I had the first of 2 chunks of Old Testament survey with a woman who not only was one of the Hebrew professors, but she also is a Deuteronomy scholar and a Torah expert. And I was like, this is amazing. She was phenomenal. And then I had Hebrew, and I also had a biblical interpretation. And that class was with Dr. Ray Lubeck, who is the guy who taught Tim Mackey and Carmen Imes and Andrew Teeter everything that they know. So I got an amazing opportunity to learn from him.
That's super cool. They'll be able to learn from someone who poured into them. That's awesome.
Yeah,
because Carmen Imes is the beast.
I had 2 amazing classes with him, and I didn't get to take the third because the school closed and I had to transfer. So that was unfortunate that I didn't get to finish that series with him. But I also took OTBT from him, which blew my mind as well. But that first semester, just sitting there and understanding the very literal wooden scientific method of biblical reading and interpretation that I had grown up with that I didn't realize. And when I looked into it and I talked to Ray about this, he's like, yeah, that group based their hermeneutic on Francis Bacon's scientific method. And you can go back and they write extensively about using Francis Bacon as the basis of their hermeneutic. And I'm like, that's terrible because it's not a science book. Not at all.
Exactly.
We'll get there, Warren. We'll get there. So, so as he taught me and shoved me out of learning how to not view it that way and to read it more for what it is and what it's trying to say and what is the author trying to say to you was absolutely revolutionary. And a whole lot of that Restoration Movement stuff just started crumbling really, really fast. And then as I was sitting in Old Testament survey with Dr. Josberger, she really pounded the ancient Near East mind into our brains. And as I sat there listening to her, like, here's the context, here's the way that things are, this is what happens in the cultures around it. And we started learning all of the creation narratives and how Genesis is the same but different, and all the things that it was doing. And it was so shocking and eye-opening to learn about how they experienced the world and what was actually happening in that context, and that these are nomadic and semi-nomadic people. And, like, this is why oral tradition matters, and the way that the stories are written, because a lot of these are bookmarks. So as you're traveling around in the same path of the same journey that's seasonal, you get to the place where, here, this is the rock pile at the Jordan River. That's a reminder of the story. You get to the spot where Abraham sees in the visions of the stars. That's another. So these are all bookmarks to remind you of. And that's what the 66th book of the Protestant canon is, a collection of the bookmarks of the oral tradition. That's really what it is. They are writing down the important parts of those stories to remember, to keep the full story of the oral tradition alive, because they didn't trust the written word as much as they did the oral tradition. But the written word was a way to preserve enough of the oral tradition that it wouldn't die out. And
correct.
That's where our scriptures come from. So people who get really stuck, and Restoration Movement people are really bad about this. It's like, only the Bible, only these 66 books is the only thing that's true. Well, you have the Cliff Notes of what was actually going on there. Like, that's not the full story. That's the Cliff Note version of the oral tradition. And then when I started learning Hebrew, that was a whole nother level of blowing my mind, of the way of thinking about the language itself is built to be contemplative. The Hebrew
it's loaded with it.
Hebrew wants you to think about things. It doesn't just, Greek is like, we don't want to work that hard, so we're going to have 96 tenses for everything and break everything down obsessively and take one word and break it into 9 different terms. And that's the way Greek works, which is brilliant, and it's helpful for certain things. But Hebrew is like, okay, we're going to give you one word, hesed, and it's going to take you 20 minutes to explain what that word means, but we're going to do it that way because we want you to think about it, and you need to work for it. And it's
even the root meaning of the word, like the root of it, ties into other words. And other ideas come to mind. It's super cool.
We just did an episode.
Go ahead.
Yesterday, we just did an episode a couple days ago on my channel, talking about from the imagination of the storyteller. And I started with the first 3 words of Genesis. The root word for the word that we always translate as beginning goes back to head, which in the Targum actually there's notes in there that you can go back, and we're like, okay, so if Genesis 1 is out of the imagination of God, like, what does that do to the way we interact with the creation story? It was a fantastic conversation, and we're going to have to do an episode 2 because we couldn't get to all of it. But
what I was going to say actually ties into it really good, because even the way Bereshit, like in the beginning in Genesis in Hebrew, that very first letter, you guys will notice it looks like a bracket that faces the rest of the text. And the rabbis forever said that right there is on purpose. That why is the bracket is to say all that is to come next. It is pointing in that direction. So it's really fascinating that even just the shape of the letters carry with it weight and meaning. The shape, the root meaning. We could geek out about this for a while, and your Hebrew is much better than mine. But I'm much more. It's funny because I always say that I like, even though like I study Hebrew and stuff, and we all know I mispronounce everything terribly. I'm much more conceptual. Like I get the conceptual aspects of it a lot more, and so that's really lit up my brain as well. So keep going. I just wanted to let you know. I wanted to geek for a minute because like, oh, I love this. Yes.
Yes. Well, and when we were out in coffee that one day, and I was like, Will, when you get into Hebrew, remember it works like sign language. It sets things up conceptually in space and interacts with the story in three dimensions. And you were like, oh my gosh, like, yeah.
And as a sign language interpreter, as a guy who does sign language and does Hebrew, I never connect, like those two didn't come together until you said that. I'm like, I'm an idiot.
Well, I was a sign language interpreter. That was my undergrad practicum was done as an ASL interpreter. With the it was fantastic. Anyway, so and then when one of the first things that untethered me from Protestantism was when we had done in Old Testament class, everybody had done our Deuteronomy reflection papers and turned them in, and doing that to a Deuteronomy scholar, that she handed them all back, and she was like, I want you to redo these because Deuteronomy is a love letter, not a letter of the law. And I'm like, I don't understand what you just said.
But it's called the law.
And I had to go back and read the Deuteronomy 3 times to actually see it. And then I was like, I have never looked at Torah again the same since she did that. And it was like, oh, now I'm starting to understand. And then you get into the if-thens, and there's only actually 10 thou shalts, and that's the 10 commandments, and everything else is if-then scenarios. That is like, here is like, okay, so if you do something and somebody's ox dies, like here's the worst case scenario thing is this. The maximum sentence you're going to get is this. But the priest has a whole lot of leverage and a whole lot of room to work with you. And there's a whole lot of space for grace until you get to that. You don't jump to the, this is not like this. It doesn't work like everybody gets the maximum sentence, even if it's your first transgression. Right. Like this is if then life scenarios. So, if it's about the preservation of life and you have to be a good neighbor, but you do something that causes the way that they are able to farm and keep a living and affects their ability to live, then what do you do? So there's a whole lot of if then scenarios in there. And growing up with Campbellites who love to take everything woodenly literally, are like, then you get into this whole list of 613 thou shalts that turn you into a neurotic mess of, am I, and they end up being, without realizing it, merit-based workstation, like,
oh yeah. Well, to that point, by the way, real quick, Fisherman's Corner, thank you for gifting the channel memberships. You don't have to, but I appreciate you, sir. And for anyone who gets those gifted memberships, you can go to my channel, and I have a members only playlist. You can see what I have there for members. But real quick, to that point, it was funny because I went through that. I'm trying to think, hold on, what's 2015, 2025? I went through that around 2019, 2020, especially during COVID. I have a lot of Messianic Jewish friends. And they were, and I was going into ancient Near Eastern studies at that point. And that's when the ancient Near East started becoming more three-dimensional. And I was like, oh, wow, we really got this wrong. And then they didn't say it was a love letter. I wrote that down, though. I really like the way you described that that's a love letter. And they're like, no, the whole point was preserving life is the way they worded it. And they're like, it's not God he's not putting these mitzvahs in place because out of, punishment or anything like that. It is for love in many ways. Anyway, it was really fascinating hearing it from them, and then understanding it more and more. So yeah, it's funny because I went through that about 5-ish years ago, and you can actually probably go back in time on my channel and see my evolution through that. So that's really good stuff.
And second semester with Hebrew, and I had patristics, which was like the history of Christian theology. And then I had systematic theology. So they had me stuck in two different theology classes at the same time, which was interesting. And oh no, I had prophets. I guess I was there 3 semesters. So second semester was prophets, systematic theology, and Hebrew, I think. I don't know. I'm getting all confused. But anyway, so the two ones that matter was prophets and systematic theology. And the guy that was our teacher for his systematic theology, the very first day, okay, he's Pentecostal, systematic theologian, and sharp guy, got up and said, "Lady and gentlemen," because I was the only woman in the theology class, of course. And he said, "Lady and gentlemen, I'm here to tell you systematic theology has failed you all." And I was like, whoa, that's crazy. And so he spent some time going through certain things, and then you'll love this, Will. He spent a month and a half burning down PSA. And he started with Augustine and went through every single development that led to PSA and just burned it to the ground.
Nice.
And I was just like, because the Campbellites are very, very hardcore into PSA. And so I'm like, I don't even understand what is going on here, because you just destroyed everything I believe. And I don't know what to do with that. I don't have anything to replace it with. I don't know what now? But I was also in prophets class at the same time. And this guy was phenomenal. And I remember we started with Isaiah. It was very Isaiah heavy. But he's like, everything we did every week, he kept punting to Ezekiel 36 and 37. And I'm like, okay. Then we got through Isaiah, we got through Jeremiah, and then we get to Ezekiel. And I'm like, okay, which week are we going to do Ezekiel? Because I'm going to skip, because Ezekiel's weird and it doesn't make any sense. And I don't like that book. So I'm just going to skip that week. And he's like, don't you dare. You better show up. And so I was like, okay, fine. And because I had to get the answer to the question. And we ended up spending 2 weeks in Ezekiel. And I absolutely fell in love with the book of Ezekiel. And Ezekiel
so good.
36, the Valley of the Dry Bones, this is the gospel before the gospel was written. Like, if you want to know how it works and how the book of Romans works, Ezekiel 36. You have
that's the eschatological hope right there. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's absolutely amazing. And so now I'm like, this is why, and he is why Ezekiel's my favorite book of the Bible, because we started with, look at, here we got this and this vision. And he's like, okay, he had us read it, and we were trying to talk about it. And the fun part was there's only 3 of us in that class, and all 3 of us were in Hebrew. So we got to go super deep, nerdy in on these prophets and the Hebrewism, what was going on there. But he's like, okay, what's going on here? And we're all just like, there's wheels and eyes and spinning things and floating and like whatever. And he's like, yeah, you got to remember, this is Ezekiel. He's sitting in Babylon, and Babylon is what? This is all Enlil imagery. So they're reading this message from God, and it looks like Enlil shows up. And then all of a sudden at the end of Ezekiel 1, poof, it's Yahweh. We are going back to Exodus, and we are sitting back in where they're sitting in exile, and the overthrow and the battle between, with the plagues, and God says, I am the God here. And a people whose identity and religion is anchored in their land, and you're not in your land anymore. What in the world is Yahweh doing in Enlil's territory? And I was just like mind blown. It was amazing sitting there and talking about all of, and then it was just, it was just totally reordering everything, but I didn't have a framework to hang it on. And so I was just getting more and more and more struggling in where I was in the context in the church that we were in, which was a non-denominational nothing. They really were Calvinists, but they didn't want to admit it, actually, because they were supported by an Acts 29 church planting organization. They all held to I think they were like 2.5 point Calvinists. They all held to PSA. They held to, you know, a bunch of stuff that I'm just
Sounds like what I grew up in. Your restoration movement thing is very similar to my independent fundamentalism that I grew up in. So I always joke around that they were half Calvinists, like, or the halfway there, like they're halfway Calvinistic, like,
yeah.
living on a prayer and all that.
The one that we came out of, when I started going back to church, I avoided Church of Christ, Christian Church. I'm like, I'm not going back to that. So we just did unaffiliated non-denominationals. And the one that we ended up in, the one that I ended up leaving was not super honest with themselves about how Calvinists they were. I don't think. So, you know, I'm like, and that was the church. And the last straw for me, I think, that really sent me on the path to, being out of going into Protestantism or being a Protestant anymore, I think was, I was at this gathering with some of the other women from that church. And we got to talking about how there was this void in miscarriage support for families who had just experienced miscarriages. And some of us have had multiple of them. And so just kind of that informal talking about support for that. And somebody's spouse came up at that point in the conversation and had to helpfully suggest that we hope that those children were elect. And I'm like, I don't even understand what you just said or why you would just say that. I had no context for it, because Church of Christ Christian Church, they're Armenian leaning in their soteriology. So I wasn't familiar with formally with Calvinism and what that was and what their stuff was there. So I was like, why would you say something like that? And so I was like, I have to go look this up because I don't even know what this is. And by typing that in there, I stumbled across Soteriology 101 and Leighton Flowers' channel. And yeah. I watched probably 3 or 4 of their videos, and that's how I stumbled across Warren's channel and started watching Idol Killer. And then because of something that you guys had done together, started watching The Church Split. And I'm like, okay.
And she lost brain cells.
And this is so like, and then I'm like, okay, now I'm understanding where their mindset is coming from. Hey, Braxton. We were actually just talking about you earlier. That, you know, where this is coming from, what this theology is. And I was like, how could you say something so monstrous to somebody as to suggest to them that their innocent unborn child would be thrown into hell by God? Like, how in the world could you say that to someone? That doesn't fit. I'm like, and I'm just that I can't do that anymore. And then when I started hearing that kind of stuff from our pastor, once I started to understand what it was, I'm like, I can't do this. I can't do it. I can't call myself a Protestant anymore. I don't know what I am, but I can't call myself a Protestant anymore. And this is about the point in time where I'm like, okay, you know, I'm in this seminary class. I was in this Bible study with some ladies, and I'm like, all this really cool Old Testament stuff. And they're trying to, you know, like they're asking me a bunch of questions and background on the book of John. And I'm like, I don't have time to answer all of these questions. So this is what I'm going to do. Everybody who watches YouTube technically has a channel. So I'll just make background videos and put those on there so that those women in my Bible study could go watch all the background of John. And we don't, for the stuff we don't have time for, because we can either talk about the background or we can talk about John, but we don't have time for both. And so,
I mean, at least, so, you know,
like, and so I ended up just starting my tiny little channel that wasn't ever supposed to do anything serious. It was never supposed to get any attention other than the 8 other women in my Bible study, right? And that's about the time that I started being a mod for Warren, right? And I'm like, I don't know, you know, I even how to do any of this. And I was trying to figure out, And then at a certain point, I'm like, okay, I've started uploading a couple of videos that, I don't know. I think, well, I think what it is I had become friends with Nick Quint, and because I started watching the Mike Winger series on women in ministry, and I got through the first one, and I was like, okay, that's got to be a better response to that than that, because that to me just doesn't seem to be working. So I started searching around for a response to Mike Winger, and the only one I found was the video by Nick and Allison Quint. So I emailed Nick, and he ignored the first 2 or 3 emails that I sent him, and then I said, but in persistence, then we got to coming back and forth. And yeah, Roddy has been my friend since before we became friends, modding for Warren together. And I was like, nobody's going to watch this channel. This is crazy. This is ridiculous. Nobody's going to care anything I have to say about the Old Testament. And he was like, nope, you're crazy. But so anyway, through Nick getting, pushing and encouraging, we became friends. And then, Warren, actually, as much as he likes to complain that I quit modding to go do my channel, was actually a big encouragement and was one of the first people who actually came on my channel. Nick was the first one, I think, that came on my channel. And then I got through all that, got connected with Floral from Under a Rock, doing his Church Under a Rock channel for a little while. And so, and then you came on my channel and we did that Old Testament biblical theology, which we need to redo that biblical theology video, because there's a lot of things in there that I really want to change. So we need to redo that one.
Oh no, more hanging out with friends. Someone stop me.
Right. So it just kind of, through all these connections that I made, because I had been modding for Warren, I was watching and got connected to Tyler Fowler, because there was an episode that Warren did where Tyler was interviewing him. And so I was watching that, and Tyler was talking about, hey, yeah, we're going to try to start setting up mods if anybody's interested. So I emailed him and I was like, I'm not interested in doing it full time, but I will help you get your mod set up, because I've been doing this for Warren for a while and I kind of know the ropes. And so he jumped on that, and then discovered that I actually had a channel and started having me, doing some stuff with them. He came on my channel, and then they invited me to come help cover when David took a leave of absence. So I joined Faith Unaltered for a while, and that's how I got connected with some people who were Orthodox or exploring Orthodoxy, and started having conversations with some of them, because I was headed towards, I went and visited a couple Catholic churches and sat through Mass a couple of times. And some of it was like, there's some stuff in here that I'm hearing that I heard from my Calvinist pastor that I don't like. Mm-hmm. And I don't like, I just, that doesn't sit. There's a lot that I like, but there's some stuff that I just can't sign on to. So I started, I started really just sitting in the other church that we were at. It's like, I don't know what I'm going to do. And these guys that I started talking to, they're like, go back and visit a Catholic church again, go to an Anglican church, and go to an Orthodox church, and just kind of sit in those spaces for a little while and just feel them out. And I went to an Anglican service, and I was like, and I hit a week where they started going through some stuff that sounded very PSA. And I'm like, I can't, I'm not down with that. And but I was hesitant to go. I was hesitant to go to an Orthodox church, because this is something that was completely foreign. And in the context that I grew up in, the Orthodox were talked about like these medium, idol worshiping, wizard almost Satanists that do all these
Wizards.
horrible, terrible. I mean, seriously, because they're like mystery. What is that? They're like spell casting wizards, and now I'm like, I get to be Galadriel. This is awesome. Like, like now I'm like totally okay with that. But it was just like it was something to me that was so foreign. I had no clue what it was. But as I was talking to these guys and my friends, and there was one of them especially who took a lot of time to sit down and go through my questions and my objections, and really, he and I had some pretty good knockdown, drag out disagreements about stuff. So yeah, Will hasn't actually fully taken on the full power of my ability to be disagreeable yet. But a couple of these guys sure did. And really, really, really struggled through trying to unpack all of this stuff. But it wasn't until it was the middle of November last year, and I finally went to my first Vespers and they helped me spend a lot of time helping me find a good church.
When did you go to your first Vespers?
It was mid-November last year.
Oh, that's really funny. So you went to your first Vespers a year after I went to my first Vespers, but mine was at Christmas, like Christmas season. Real funny story on that one. Real quick, and then you'll continue. So it was actually Christmas Eve that it was going to land. This Vespers was on, but what I was frustrated with was it was a snowstorm in Michigan, and it was a blizzard, and every place was canceling their Christmas Eve service. And I was like, I want to go to a Christmas Eve service. And so I was looking them all up, and the only place that I saw that hadn't officially canceled it online or anything was an Eastern Orthodox church in the area. A beautiful, beautiful one. And I was like, well, I've always wanted to go. This is my opportunity. And my brother-in-law, who was like 17, lived with us at the time. And I was like, all right, guys, we're good to go. And it's like, and he mentioned apparently to my wife, she didn't tell me till later, that he was like, do we have to go? Like, it's cold out. Like, I don't really want to go to church. And her response was, do you really think Dad is going to let us not go to church? He goes, no. And so then we all loaded up, and that was our first Vespers. And they were all, and like, my brother-in-law was like, what is going on here? And I'm like, this is awesome. Like, I was like, I only understand like 50% of what's going on here. Thank God I read some books, but like, this is so cool. Anyway, keep going. It's just really funny that they're about close. Anyway.
Yeah. The one that they kind of decided that would be a really good and interesting one for me to try was an Antiochian. It was an Antiochian parish, because that was definitely divinely inspired choice, because I walked in there, and this parish is absolutely gorgeous and beautiful, but I walked in, and because I'm so versed in the Old Testament, I automatically was like, hey, this is the tabernacle. Like there's the narthex, which is the same thing as the outer court, and then you got the nave, which is the holy place. And then
sorry, everyone misbehaves in the comment section.
I know it's distracting, but it's funny. And then you've got the part behind the iconostasis, which is the Holy of Holies, and the altar's back there. And I'm like, Old Testament everywhere. This is like Leviticus come to life. This is crazy. And in Vespers, Vespers is probably the best entry service to start with, because you still get the incense, you still get the rhythm, you still get, but I was blown away, because by the time I got done with that first Vespers, and they had read entire Psalms, it wasn't just like, oh, here's our favorite, like 2 verses that make us feel good. Like, we're reading the whole thing, and we're reading all of them. So we've been through all 151, depending on how you number and which version you use, in a year. And it's all of them. It's the imprecatory ones. It's the life is horrible ones. Like, you read all of them, and they're all incorporated into your prayer life as well. And so, but I'm sitting there, like, they just read 2 entire Psalms and a huge chunk of, I think it was Genesis. And there was a huge chunk of a couple of the non-gospel parts, because they don't read the gospel at Vespers usually. And but I was blown away how much Old Testament that they had gone through and read. And I was like, this is awesome, because you'd never, hardly ever, rarely hear the Old Testament in a Protestant church. And when you do, they speed through it as fast as possible. So it's just kind of like, I just love being able to be saturated in that. So I went to a couple of Vespers, and then they were like, okay, you got to get brave and go to a liturgy. And so I was like, okay, well, I'll try. I'll try. And so I went to a liturgy, and I will never forget this. The very first liturgy that I went to, I came and went to, or because before there's a smaller service that's called Orthros. And then there's actually the liturgy service. So there's kind of two. The Orthos is kind of your time to decompress and get ready for liturgy. There's a whole lot of prayers that go on there, and some stuff. And then divine liturgy starts. And I remember by the time we got to when they were doing the Eucharist, I was sitting there, and I remember distinctly feeling this, like, I am sitting here in holy ground. I need to take my shoes off, and I really need to cover my head, because this is crazy, freaky. Like, it was amazing. And I was like, I've never felt that in a church before, anything like close to that before at all. That just holiness that I encountered in the Orthodox Church. And I'm like, okay, this is a weird one-time bizarre thing. And I started regularly going during Nativity to St. George's, and it was just every single time. And so I'm like, there is something different going on here. If every time I go, I'm overwhelmed with holiness, so that I need to take my shoes off and cover my head, because I have never experienced that in a Protestant context ever. And this is crazy. And so now, like, I wear a head covering when I go to church. Whenever we're in the nave and there's a service is actually going, I have a head covering that I wear. It's just as part, just because of that holiness encounter that's so different. And I got the chance to go with a Protestant, inquiring friend to his first liturgy. And afterwards we were talking, because they do coffee hour afterwards, which is the second liturgy. And I'm like getting his impressions and hearing like his reactions and stuff. And he's like, there's something different. I can't quite put my finger on it. And I'm like, maybe it's a difference of holiness. And he was like, that's it. That's it. Exactly. Like, and it just was like, this gets into this thing that now I've learned, that when we talk about in the Orthodox Church, real presence, that's like what that means. Like, it is the real physically tangible in ways, definitely spiritual, real presence. That is something that I think for me was unique to the Orthodox Church. And that became even more heightened after I got received into the church, after my baptism and chrismation, because there's certain things that you can't participate in until you're fully baptized and received into the church. And so,
Right.
And once I started actually participating in those things, it became even more distinct. And the difference between watching and participating.
Mhm.
And I think for me, the thing that really was the nail, the last thing that pushed me to be like, I have to make a choice, and my choice is going to be Orthodoxy, is the second to the last time I sat in that Protestant church. And my husband still goes there. He's not interested in being Orthodox. He's like, if you like it, if you love it, as long as we're going to wind up in heaven together, whatever, go ahead and do your thing. So, it works for us. We make it work. But I was sitting there in his Protestant church, and they were getting ready to do communion. And a couple weeks before that, I was like, I kind of need to stop participating in communion, because it just doesn't feel right anymore. And I was sitting there just watching them do the normal routine that they do. And it just hit me like a train. I'm watching a funeral. These guys are having a funeral. This is a memorial service for the dead. There's no life in this. And I was just floored. And I came home and I was messaging with my Orthodox friends, and they're like, yep, that's exactly what it is. And so I was like, that's crazy to watch, I think, the way in which when the Eucharist is treated, that this is the body and blood of Christ. And people get weird about like, oh, well, this is like cannibalism, or they're like whatever, like all the classic objections to that. And as I was sitting down and talking with a couple of friends, a really good mutual friend of ours, and the guy who's my sponsor, we were chatting about this and why that is so important. And he goes, because I was like, well, I'm still trying to get my head around the practical lived out difference of those two things, of one being the actual body blood of Christ and the other one being just a representative symbol of that and not being the actual presence. And he's like, well, you are what you eat. So you either eat and become Christ or you eat and become empty. And I was like, whoa, that's insane. Like, but now that I've been received into the church and been participating in some of those things for a while now, and not a long time, because I just got baptized and chrismated back in the middle of August. So it's only been a few months, but I can tell you that for me, the actual real practical application and living that out is so drastically different. And there are ways in which that has been so profoundly healing of a lot of very deep spiritual trauma in a way that anything that I experienced in the Protestant context couldn't even touch. And that stuff is now open and being treated and being healed, that before you just had to learn how to manage. And it really was, for me, the difference between when you actually live it. Does it actually change and heal the way that Scripture talks about that it's supposed to change and heal you? And for me, the Protestant church never did. And the Orthodox Church in a year has done more for me than my entire life did in the Protestant church. And I find it to be something that is, there's a lot of things that we do and a lot of routines and a lot of the sacraments creates some work and some intention to it. But for me, the lived experience of actually believing that Christ is in everything, and that the Eucharist is actively participating in a relationship that gets integrated into your very DNA, and that confession and the pastoral care and the way that they have sponsorship set up and the prayer routines and all of it has become something that has become organic and part of my DNA. And I notice when I miss. And there have been days, because the last couple months have been really tough for me. There's been a lot of stuff that's been going on, and I've been really struggling with some things, and trauma recovery stuff. And there have been days where I get up in the morning and I just like, I can't do it. I can get down to my prayer corner, but I got nothing. And I can pull out my prayer book, and because of the way that we believe about the eternal now and the real presence, I can just sit and read that prayer, and I don't have to put any effort into it. I don't even have to mean it, whatever you mean by that, because I know that there are a whole lot of other Christians who are praying those same prayers. And the way that those are written is that we are written into each other's prayers. So like on a Sunday morning, when you got going through the litanies, and there's all these prayers about for Orthodox Christians, you've got 24-hour rolling prayer coverage over your life. And every time someone sits down and does something out of their prayer book, I'm praying for all of them, and they are all praying for me. And it's just like, I have however many million people praying for me today. And in a very real way that we believe is actually, connected in a way that matters, that is different than the way that Protestants understand prayer. That, to me, the other squeamish, and issues that I had have kind of either resolved themselves or they don't matter anymore. And so I just, to me, the actual real life impact, and to be able to sit down, because I sat down with all of our, the deacons who ran the catechism class, and my Orthodox friends who are deep in theology nerds, and the priest that I do confession with. And I have asked them some very, very difficult questions that always sent all of my Protestant friends and pastor friends running away and dropping conversations and ignoring. And they have never done that. And we have sat down and we have wrestled through. And here's one of the things, Will, that I've learned in conversations about theology. When the Orthodox will say something like, well, that's theologumena, that doesn't mean I'm not going to talk about it because I just can't know it. We're still going to sit down and talk about it and wrestle through it. We just have to start the conversation with holding intention that it's okay that I don't know this, and being okay with exploring those rabbit trails, but knowing we're not going to get an answer on the other end. And that's okay. To when a Protestant just appeals to mystery, that usually is a cover for, I don't know the answer. You're asking me a question I don't know the answer to, and I don't know how to engage in your question. So I'm just going to wave it off as appeal to mystery and avoid it. And there's a very big difference in those two things. And that to me was another big significant difference in the impact and the connection that I felt in Orthodoxy, was being able to start the conversation with, well, I don't know, but let's talk about it anyway. And dismissing because I don't know, and I don't know how to engage with that, and I don't know how to answer that because my theology is so broken, I create more problems than I answer when I try to answer your question. So we're just not even going to engage in that, was extremely disheartening and very disconnecting. If you're not wrestling with Trinitarian theology and trying to wrestle with, understanding everything that I don't know about God, that helps eliminate a whole lot of questions. If you just get into what we don't know and being like, that there helps. And being able to, wrestle through some of these other things and be like, it's okay. And starting with where you are and having the definition and everything be redefined, but because sin is not this inherent moral corruption that makes me terribly broken and unworthy of anything in a bad way that creates toxic shame. And, how do I even try to ask for forgiveness when I'm apparently morally corrupt and unfixable? To the Eastern understanding that sin is sickness, and you have a soul sickness, and you have soul wounds, and that need tended. And some of those are very, very deep. And some of those, it will take a lifetime of treatment. And that's what the sacraments are those different types of medicine that help treat that sickness in you and help bring it out and help bring it into the light. And that Christ is the one who on a very real practical level interacts with us, because that's how you get healed. And that's why, like, the physical real presence in the Eucharist matters, because I participate in that and I'm ingesting Christ and he becomes absorbed into me. I've started making changes and things are healing and stuff is happening. And I haven't even tried and I haven't even worked for it. It's, or even put in the effort to do, because I just participate.
Well, this is one of the things that Bridget and I have talked about too. There is something to the restorative, like actual like health restoration view of the body within like atonement theory, if we can use that, within Eucharist, the idea of you're participating in Christ, not only his death and burial and his sacrifice, but also his resurrection and the restoration of the new creation. So there is something to that. And one of the things I wanted to quickly respond to in here, because it's funny, as people I've been discussing, this is someone sharing their own personal story. So here's the thing, that means that there is going to be certain intellectual reasons and also, yes, religious experience. And religious experience, although I don't think someone's religious experience, like my religious experience, should make you convert or deconvert into something. It's my personal religious experience. I've known people who left like the Roman Catholic Church, went to Protestantism, and had a very real spiritual experience. But I've also known other people who, like yourself, went from Protestantism to Eastern Orthodox, had a real spiritual experience. I don't think we can downplay people's spiritual, like, actual experiences. So I don't think that's a right criticism if anyone's saying that, like, hey, you know, Amber had this experience, therefore it's not, you know, that's all I'm hearing here is one of the comments. Yeah, I get it, but that's because this is her experience. This is her story. She gets to say that these are the things that she experienced. And to play into like that moment of holiness, to go back a few minutes to what you said, when we went to Albania, we were in Eastern Europe, and I've been to Eastern Europe multiple times, by the way, and I've seen Orthodox churches over in Eastern Europe, and I've seen Orthodox churches in America, and yes, some of them operate differently, blah, blah, blah. We can talk about those things, but that's not the point of this right now. But we did go to Vienna for a day, and I went into a lot of the cathedrals there because I'm a nerd and I don't really care about other things. So I'm just like, let me see all the churches. And it was funny because we went to the big one, you know, that's there that everyone cares about. But I had more of that experience when I walked into a place called St. Michael's, and I was just like hit where I was like, you really do. I felt like I was on holy ground to one degree or other. And it's funny because we were there with a few people, and like, you know, here's what's funny is that you can have that experience in different places where you can just tell that there's great care taken to make sure that is the dwelling place and the worship place of the Lord. And so I don't think so just so everyone is aware in the comment section, I think that a lot of people have those experiences, but I've also experienced that in Protestant churches. I think that's the point, at least the way I'd word this is, because it also depends on the Protestant church, is like I was talking, we're going through Haggai kind of today a little bit in class. And one of the things about Haggai is the fact that the people were sad that their temple was not as grand as Solomon's temple. But the thing is, but God still goes, I'm present among you. He quotes Exodus to them. And it's because in many ways, we need to understand that it's presence, not polish, that God ultimately cares about. But also taking a time and space for that presence is why people will feel that sacredness depending on the place. And it might not even be as grand. But you can still walk sometimes into, like, I've walked into a small Orthodox parish compared to an Orthodox parish I've been to before, and you still could feel that depending on how what is prepared. Or have we prepared the way for the Lord, and do we go into it knowing we're going to experience that? And I think it depends on every place. And it's one of the things I've told people, Protestants, in reaction to the Catholic Church, with that maybe overemphasized ritual and some of these things, a lot of Protestants threw it all out altogether. And because of that, now it's like people feel like there's something missing. And it's because, well, there's been a ritual aspect to the faith since the beginning. And God never said he hates them just because he hates them. Whenever he talks about he hates your feasts and your festivals, it's not because he hates the feast and the festival. He hates that their hearts were far from them during the feast and the festivals. So there's not the presence of. So with that said, go ahead, Amber. I just felt like I should interject as the host for people in the comment section, because I was like, well, I think there's some missing forest for the trees. Your experience can matter, and that could play into something. Should you not go to a place that spiritually uplifts you and it gives you that experience? Or, anyway, keep going. I apologize.
I think that's about it. I mean, now I found a place that I feel seen. And I remember when they had the big celebration after with the group that I got baptized and chrismated with, and we were over in the fellowship hall, and it was the party part, and I was sitting there, and my daughter came, and she gave up on church quite a while ago, and which is really sad to me, but she came to that. And when we were talking afterwards, I was like, so kiddo, what do you think? And she looked at me and she said, well, Mom, how does it feel to be in a church where you're wanted and not tolerated? And I was like, whoa, I was like, that's it. It really, because when you when you're struggling and you have to sit in a space where life is a mess and you're dealing with a lot of spiritual abuse and a lot of trauma and trying to heal from that. And they didn't have the mechanism at that church to do that the way that the Orthodox Church has for me. And it seems to me, and again, this is the context in the churches that I grew up with and interacted with. There was a lot of performance theater, and the only people who got to do anything were the ones who acted like their lives were the most put together, and they were the most saved and the most, spiritually grown and spiritually mature. When you get into it behind the scenes, their life was just as much of a mess as everybody else. And so anybody who was honest about their mess was sidelined and treated like they were tolerated, instead of, there's something to say. And this is one of the things that I am a huge fan of the Desert Fathers and the Cappadocians. And they all talk about the importance.
A woman of taste, I see.
They all talk about the importance of work. And for people who are really spiritually struggling and are dry and need healing, giving them a job, giving them a task, work is important. And to be now in a place where, they're like, yes, we see what an absolute mess and, traumatic, sick, disaster that you are, but here's some meaningful things that you can do. And just the fact that this is something that has value to them and they give it to me to do was, what an amazing way to make people feel seen and loved, instead of just sit over here and do nothing until you are able to act and together enough to be presentable enough to do something. And instead of here, do something and that will help heal you.
Yeah. Well, question then, because you kind of hinted to it there, but I thought I may as well ask this one that I started earlier from Roddy. Roddy asked, serious question for Amber. Do you believe that you being raised in a cult-like group made your decision to convert easier than it would have been if maybe you'd been Baptist or something more mainline?
I think for me, it made it harder because I was not about to go back into a situation because of all of the medical things. And then my parents adopted a gal out of foster care who was a sociopath and a narcissist. And so, yeah, you and I both know what that's like. So, I was not about to step out of situations that felt like mind control and controlling and dictation of behavior and merit. that I wanted something that actually looked like what Christ was doing and why the incarnation matters so much. And to me, and my experience of it, and a lot of my friends who have converted from Protestantism to Orthodoxy say various versions of the same thing, that these things that we do in our sacraments aren't just rules to follow that we earn our salvation with. These are part of a liturgical existence that is woven into reality from creation. I mean, if
Well,
you
it's part
look
of
at the
living and experiencing the incarnational reality, right? That's the idea.
yeah,
And that's one of the things I've been saying for a while as a Protestant. Okay. So I think so, there's some new names in the chat I'm not familiar with, so I'm wondering if there's some new folks around here. So I'm a Protestant. They might not realize that, but I'm a Protestant, and that's one of the things I've said that we need to bring more of. Like, they wonder, like, oh, well, we've bled people from Protestantism. Like, well, we emphasize weird things. We have a lot of weird sacred cows in Protestantism that shouldn't be sacred cows, like BSA and a lot of Calvinist kind of leaning stuff, because that's what Protestantism started from in response to the Catholic Church. And I'm like, and then also the way we do things is so we memorialize so much, or we almost detach the incarnational reality from so much. And it almost like a fear of being too mystical, I guess. But it's like, no, you can lean into some of those things, because those are still things that Scripture talks about, like the identifying with the death, burial, resurrection, living the new creation. Now you are living in a way that you're already living as a new creation person, the incarnational reality now, but just not fully yet in the resurrection. So these are just things that we need to have a better understanding that will actually help you. Like you mentioned, healing from your trauma and healing through, and what we're processing that. People need to understand that incarnation really is the answer to that. It's the restored humanity and like your intended purpose. Like, why wouldn't you want to have that as the central emphasis of your worship? And that's why I think so many people become attracted to Eastern Orthodoxy. Whether you're Orthodox or not, people need to understand that's one of the biggest attractions, is living that incarnational reality and experiencing that and making that the central focus, because it brings healing, it gives purpose, it answers a lot of the biggest questions of life.
And it's a lot of the things that the Reformation and all of the splits and divisions and everything else that's going on in the Protestant world, that they all threw out the baby with the bathwater. And in the salvation wars of who is the least Catholic amongst the Protestants, that it really has created something that is a photocopy of what it's supposed to be, and there's no life in a photocopy. You don't get an actual relational connection out of a photocopy. You have to have the full weight of the incarnation. And this is also really awesome too, because of the thesis topic that I chose. When I picked this, I'm like, okay, so funny story. We were at the beginning of the semester. Like, I had a couple of really, really interesting ideas and for thesis topics, and I was going back and forth. Which one do I pick? And I was sitting talking to one of the deacons, and I was like, okay, I ran them both by him, and he goes, oh, that first one sounds a lot more interesting. Which book do you want to do? And I'm sitting there, and I'm like, okay, I have no clue. I like Jeremiah. I'll pick Baruch. I had no clue about Baruch. I didn't know what it was. I had never read it before. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. And now I am in the deep end of the ocean on the incarnation, because Baruch is the incarnation. And so I sent Will the first 2 chapters of my thesis, and because that's all the groundwork of how we get to where we're about to get to, of why these books need to be read, why the Septuagint Old Testament books need to be read. And the case I'm using to make that case is Baruch. And I had no idea when I picked that, and I started getting into that, why it mattered. And then I went through in chapter 2 of my thesis, just dismantling Baruch in the Greek. And it was mind-blowing. And just like I was absolutely blown away. And now I'm like, after I take a couple days off, I'm trying to take all of winter break off, but I'm so excited about this topic now that I don't think I'm going to make it, because chapters 3 and 4 really get into the canonical narrative of the incarnation. And then chapter 4 is why it matters. And so it ties the whole thing all back together. And being able to do this right before Christmas, right before Advent, and being like in the deep end of the ocean on the incarnation, absolutely.
What more could you
amazing.
want?
Like, I know.
As a Bible nerd, it's like, yes, this is amazing.
I mean, it was just, and I was like, I was so, it's one of those things you're like, I think I get the incarnation. And now I'm like, I had no clue about the incarnation. It's just so much more epic than I ever
that's why, like,
was.
I've joked around, like, that's why, with my, well, not joked, I've talked about how in my study of the atonement, I went from a hardcore Baptist penal substitutionary guy to like completely being anti-PSA. And one of the center aspects of that was the incarnation. And like, once I saw exactly what we're talking about, like, even I talked about that in Haggai today. I was like, there's an incarnational allusion here. And we talked about that in the Hebrew and how it points to this. I'm like, and I was like, how cool is that? So we're talking about this right before we celebrate Christmas. And I was like, that incarnational reality is so powerful when you really understand the threads it's connected to. And, I did theology of the body a lot last year, and that incarnational reality is part of the theology of the body. It's just, it literally is everything. The incarnation is the bow tie on the entire biblical narrative, if you understand it.
And it's another point, actually, I want to make you. Thank you for reminding me about that, because most the Protestants traditions and the churches that I interacted with and was a part of, and now in conversations that I have, like in the classes that I'm in, like I'm in a spiritual formation class right now, that's just wrapping up. But as I've been having conversations with the people in the new program that I'm in now, after I had to transfer, it struck me how so many Protestants don't understand what the image of God is. There's no definition. And I think that because you've thrown out some of the books that you've thrown out, and thrown out the idea of real presence, and you've thrown out an actual solid understanding of Trinitarian theology, you have no definition of what the image of God is. And if you have no definition of what the image of God is, that is so foundational to understanding how we connect with God, how we connect with each other, and so many other pieces of theology. When you understand that, it is, as I'm listening to people struggling in all of the stuff we have to read at school, and listening to Protestant conversations about a whole lot of things, it's like, well, how do I understand, like, what is identity, and trying to figure out and wrestle with, and as you're looking at, and one of the best responses to a lot of some of the like progressive stuff that's been going on in scholarship for a while, who, whatever label you want to grab onto has some kind of special claim on the truth of the gospel, because, and all of those labels are not the anchor of personhood. That's all anchored in the image of God, which is all anchored in this whole idea of real presence and incarnation. And that's why Paul talks about, that we become the image of Christ, which is the fulfillment of the image of God, is done
right
in and through and because of the incarnation. It's all incarnation language. And it's just like, but when you throw that baby out with that bathwater, then you don't have an idea of what person is. And so trying to understand your identity in Christ and your identity with God and with each other. And I don't know what person is. It's no wonder everybody's so, confused, because you have to get a full understanding and a solid. This is why I am so adamant that you have to have three things down correctly to really get what's going on in faith and relationship with God. Number one, you have got to have a solid Christology. You've got to understand the incarnation. Number two, you have got to understand the image of God. It makes everything make sense. And 3, you have got to have a good understanding of ontology, because you have to understand that we are not born morally corrupt and morally tainted as the state in which we start, because we are never, even after the fall, the image of God is never taken away. The fact that everything was deemed good is never reversed. We are still born with no bad parts, but we are sick. Our soul is sick. Like, how much more amazing is that to tell somebody than to tell somebody, I'm sorry, you were chosen before creation was established to go to hell because God, didn't pick your lucky lottery number, and you're so morally corrupt that there's nothing you can do about it. Like, how damaging is that to people? Like, you just turned God into some sort of vengeful monster who hates me because of something I have absolutely no control over. That's not God.
And I know people will sit there and be like, "Oh, this is just emotional." No, this is like actual pastoral application. Like that. This is actual. How do I live my faith? It's supposed to be this life-changing thing. How do you live your faith if this is what you like? How you're taught this stuff, how you're taught about this stuff matters. We have kids in my youth group right now. Like, I have a young lady. She wasn't raised in church or anything, and to see her understand what it meant to be an image bearer of Salim, this what that all entails. Like, her and her boyfriend, who are recent converts over the last couple of years, they're like it's so cool to see them not have been indoctrinated with that stuff and just instantly come into those understandings, because you see the shift in understanding in young minds that things they don't have to wrestle with. It's really cool. Right. So with all that, now, so Amber, before we wrap up here, is there anything you want people to like? So, okay, let's say now my audience is very mixed, because it's like, it's what I do. So I'm gonna have Protestants here, I'm gonna have some Roman Catholics here, and I'm gonna have some Eastern Orthodox here. That's just the nature of my channel. I have a lot of Protestants and Orthodox. That's just part of it. What is something you want people to take away from this conversation and your story?
I think probably 2 things. One, I think that everybody comes from a place of profound brokenness, and everybody needs to be seen. And if your theology is getting in the way of that, then maybe your theology needs to change. Because our theology shouldn't other people. It should make us love them more, because Christ loved them as much as he loves me.
Yeah.
And the other thing I would say is that before you start attacking and burning down somebody else's tradition, that maybe you should actually spend some time giving it a fair chance to learn what they're trying to say. I'm not saying that you should go run around trying to convert to everything, but I'm saying before you start attacking somebody else, maybe you should actually try to learn what they believe. Because I tell you, I have lost friends. I have lost connection with family. This was not an easy decision for me to make. And there have been some people who have been friends that have been on campaigns on social media attacking my church and what I believe, and haven't actually taken the time to really understand why it is that they believe the way that they do, and to understand the differences in things. And
kind of the whole, before you say you disagree, at least say I can understand.
Right. You should, you should be able to give a good, honest representation before you criticize. If you're talking to somebody, so like I know that for the most part, I have a few things that I'm really cranky about in those videos that you guys did about why you're not Orthodox. But
You can be cranky about it. It's okay.
Largely, it was a mostly fair representation. There are some things that I think you really got wrong and misrepresented that could have been done a whole lot better. But, I would at least say that you and I can have a good conversation because you're at least willing to give, you can give me at least a good very basic understanding of where I'm coming from. And then we can talk about the parts we disagree on, because I know you at least understand where I'm coming from.
Right. Well, it's just like when you and I got our coffee, you're like, here's the part where I think you got something wrong. And you explained it. I was like, oh, that actually makes more sense that way. But you were the first person to kind of thread it in the way you'd threaded it. I was like, I like that. That's better. Now I have a real quick question for you. Then we can wrap up shop unless there's something you're dying to say. But I also know that streams of when they go over, when they hit an hour and a half to 2 hours is when people start being like, okay, what the heck? But it's fine. Sometimes I'm long-winded. There's one, Paul Vanderdy is in the comments, and there's one where him and I were on a 4-hour stream, I think, with Tyler. So anyway, but Amber, Nathan asked us, and it's other people have concurred that they want to know your thoughts on this. Amber, what is your view on churches and Christians outside the Orthodox Church in light of the idea of the quote one true church? And I've talked to priests about this, and I know that not the Eastern Orthodox has actually a bit more, some people are more extreme on this than others as far as priestly representation of priests I've personally talked to. However, they're asking your view. What is your view?
Okay, so this is one of those questions that this was an issue for me that was a really big hang up, because coming out of the background that I come out of, like how can you claim to be the one true church? And that really kept me out for a while, because I've really struggled with this one. But when you go back, and this is kind of the way that we talked through this with the clergy at my parish and with some of my Orthodox friends, and like a lot of that language that people point to and look at, like, okay, so there's the church and there's everybody else, that anybody who's not inside what now we call the Eastern Orthodox Church is anathema and unsaved. Okay. That stuff was written when there was the church. This is before the schism, before the Reformation. So there was the church and there was the pagan world. So if you weren't in the church, you were in the pagan world. And depending on where you are on the spectrum of conservative and liberal, there's a lot of people who take and see and are able to, and I think, Hebrews is really helpful. The book of Hebrews is really helpful here, but, we can't, I can't say that because Will is still a Protestant, that he's outside the true church and not saved, because two things. One, I'm not omniscient. I can't see into Will's heart. So I don't know.
For all you know, I could be a bloody pagan behind the scenes, right?
You could be, yes. And, or, and two, because I can't limit God's mercy. God can do whatever God wants to do. God is sovereign, and in his mercy, he can look at Will and say, Will has a heart for me like David, and he is saved. There is no guarantee that you are Eastern Orthodox that means you are going to be saved. That's not a thing.
When
God looks into our hearts, right?
When I talk to a priest about that personally, he goes, well, the church is like, here's what I asked him, I was like, what do you guys, I've heard people say if you're not part of the Eastern Orthodox, he's like, here's the thing. He's like, what the Orthodox position is. We don't guarantee anyone's salvation.
Right.
He's like, how could we?
Right.
We know our God is merciful, but we also know he judges, and we also don't know every man's heart. So I cannot guarantee anyone's salvation.
Right.
By the way, Danielle, she's
Uh-huh.
a great supporter of the channel. She says, so lovely to see Amber on your show. Agreed with you, Amber, so many times. We have all these gatekeepers of Christianity. It really shows how much the actual gospel is misunderstood. I'll have to catch up on this one later. So thank you so much for the super chat as well. But I just thought that was a very nice word of encouragement since we've had a lot of the others. So anyway, yeah, keep going. Sorry.
That's okay. That's just what I would say. It's like, we can't, I am not foolish enough to tell God what he can and cannot do. And anyone who is embracing the spirit of orthodoxy is going to say the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
We say that, okay, so I heard it explained this way, and this was really helpful to understand. The Orthodox Church is like, okay, so like say that we're going to go mountain climbing. Well, okay, the Orthodox Church is going to say, here's the trail that's already laid out, that's going to get you to the top where Christ is, and that's where we're trying to go. We know the path. We know where the bathroom stops are. We know where the pitfalls are. We know where the benches are so you can rest. We know this path really, really well. If you stay on this path, we know you're going to, have a good chance to get to the top. If you go off that path and you go rogue, we can't help you because we don't know. There's no, porta potties out there. There's no trails. We don't know how to, we don't know outside of the path. So we can't say you're not going to get up to the top to find Christ. We just don't know how you're going to get there. So we can't help you. And I'm like, that makes so much more sense to me. We don't say, and the Orthodox Church tries to be very careful to not make claims to things that they don't know. So that's where you hear a lot of things that they will say things like, this is Stay Legumina, or I can't speak to that, or, or the vague answers that frustrate the heck out of Protestants, because we're not going to say to claim to know something that we don't know. So the Orthodox Church doesn't know the Protestant world, and they don't know all of that to know the process of, here's the things that we know work.
Mm-hmm.
So stay on the path, because this is the path that we know is, in our experience, the best way to get you to Christ. But outside of that path, we don't know. So we're not going to say for sure yes or no, because God's going to do what God's going to do, and he's going to give mercy to whom he's going to give mercy, and not to whom he's not.
No, well, this is where I think, what is this? Pantaloon Buffoon, which is such a funny name, says, same, Amber, what's truly beautiful, though, is that we aren't supposed to judge other people's salvation. It's not for us to decide. God might bring anyone into his church before their end, just like the thief. And this is, I really like this kind of idea. Like what she's hitting on here is so important. It is because, like, who's to say, wait, nowhere in the Bible does it say, are you judging your neighbor's salvation? No, it says, work out your salvation with fear and trembling. It tells me that you to be worried about your heart, and that you serve your community, and you look at your brothers and sisters in Christ in the best way that you can, which is as image bearers of God. And you look at them as Christ looked at. And you know what? If they end up being actually a traitor of the heart, and they lived a certain way, but God never knew them, then that's up to him. He's a perfect judge. He will judge perfectly, which means there are certain people who are part of probably the best church on the planet that will be rejected because their heart was far from him. But there's going to be people who are probably out there in the middle of the woods somewhere, they're the only Christian in their entire area. And God's going to say, well done, my good and faithful servant. Mm-hmm. Yep. It is literally not for us to judge. That is God's position to judge people's salvation. My job is to work out my salvation with fear and trembling.
Yep. So I think that's pretty much everything I have to say on
good
most of that.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot we can go around with that, but I think it's a really good, it's good stuff for people to hear and be challenged by. And I also think it's always good to hear when people sit there and say things like, I've been a Protestant for a long time. Okay. For 34 years. And being a Protestant, once in a while, you'll hear
I'm laughing at Kyle. Sorry.
Kyle. What did Kyle say?
Fire King. Oh, he was like, don't smile. And then he's like, what was that? I was trying not to smile when he said that. So,
yeah. So it was one of those, like, Protestants oftentimes they'll be like, well, how could anyone find any life in all that vain ritual? And I really like having people come on and talk about what it means, because there's meaning behind the rituals, not vain ritual. Now, some people might do it vainly, sure, but just like people go to a Protestant church vainly, that's a thing that people do. And that's why there's going to be people who that God judges. Why God has judged even Israel, we see for doing that. So it's not an either or situation. It's kind of a both and on that. Like that can happen to any person. So
there is sincerity and there is insincerity every church you go to on the planet, Catholic, Orthodox, and Protestant. It isn't exactly your level that determines whether you're sincere or not. It is the state of an openness and the willingness of your heart. However, wherever, and this is the other thing that my Orthodox friends always say, and my pastors or the clergy at my church, everybody, they always say, go where you find Christ. If you find Christ in the Anglican Church, good for you. If you find Christ in the Catholic Church, good for you. If you find Christ in the Protestant Church, good for you. If you find Christ in the Orthodox Church, good for you. Go where you find Christ.
But find Christ. That's what I care about. Like, that's what I told people. Like, I've been told before by Protestants, like, oh, you really promote Eastern Orthodoxy. I'm like, yeah, because one, I think they get a lot of things. I agree with a lot of them on a lot of stuff. But here's my thing. And then I also have heard people like, oh, so many people go to Eastern Orthodox. But like, as a Protestant, I'm like, I'd rather all the pagans and Gnosticism and all the things that we got going on in our culture, I'd rather all those people become Eastern Orthodox, Roman Catholic, or literally any other Christian besides the stuff we see today. So I'm like, I call it a net positive. If you're on my side, I don't really care what denomination you land on. Just find Christ, man. Right. But with that said, I think that was really good. Guys, I want to just encourage you again, go to When Deep Calls Deep, subscribe to her channel. She really is fantastic. As you can tell, she's a lovely individual, despite all her harassment. And calling me wrong and saying all the things. And
I give Pritchett more of a hard time for being wrong than I do you. I just like to.
He deserves it. To be fair, Pritchett brings it on himself with his own verbiage, and so do I. It's fine. If you dish it out, you gotta take. I mean, that's just all there is to it. So with that said, guys, I really hope this was a blessing to you. This is a bit different than what I normally do, which is normally I'm either going after something or discussing something controversial. But this was like just a chat with friends, and I think that's very refreshing for some people. Some people might find it less saucy, but anyway, guys, take care. God bless, and may the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ dwell with you all richly. Amber, anything you have to say for a closing statement? Nope. Maybe. Okay. All right, guys. We'll see you in the next one. Take care.